Without further ado, why don't we just go ahead and start? So if you look at the AI space today, I see a lot of danger out there, especially when you look at how, I'm not going to name the nations, but two superpowers, nation states, basically turning the entire AI development into arms race. And we've seen that article on, I would say, Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. That is just one example. And when you really look at blockchain as we know it today, it is in its infant state. It is not perfect. It's basically demonstrating certain type of consensus algorithm that'll help us to self-govern without any type of trusted parties or intermediaries out there. But that being said, even with the blockchain, there's a lot of issues. For example, when you say delegated proof of stake, it's not essentially the fully distributed system. There is a certain component of centralization. So in that context, what do we do? In fact, when we say AI decentralized in your industry, in your space, what does that mean to you? Let's start with Michelle.
So I think it's interesting that you bring up the fact that AI is being weaponized. It's one of the things we're looking at. I'm a space lawyer, and we see a lot of similarities between the development of space law and the development of law regulating AI, because it's all very new technology. What should the government hand be in guiding it, in not guiding it, in should it stamping it down? We don't want to kill the industry, but we need to regulate a little bit in order to give people parameters with which to work in. I'm a lawyer. I want you guys out building things, not in a law court. One of the things we're really excited about at Moonkind is the idea of getting rid of the sovereign paradigm. On the moon, in a colony on Mars, can we move away from a national sovereignty idea? Right now, under international law, we only consider sovereign actors in space. We don't consider individual actors. And that's going to change next year when individual actors get up onto the moon with rovers, with Astrobotic or Team Indus. And so we really want to look at how can we create a separate governance regime in space using AI and decentralization.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll be very brief. In my view, and what's the biggest risk today is data protection through the blockchain. It's very scary that maybe my Android phone can record right now what I'm saying. I don't know, there may be a backdoor in the hardware, in the software that allows all my information to go to some big corporation. What is the biggest threat of blockchain to governments, that governance, is the protection it can offer, and what I think will be the next big step from the blockchain community when it comes to AI, it will be exactly this, some kind of governance and regulation that it will not constrain the ecosystem, because the signs are very bad coming in 2018 by global governments. But I will give an analogy, because in my previous life I was involved in the music industry for many, many years. When Napster came out, they tried to kill it and they sued it. When Kazaa came out, they did the same. When LimeWire, I think they acquired LimeWire, and then BitTorrent came, and what the music labels were doing, they couldn't sue it anymore, right? And this transformed completely the entertainment industry, whether this is music or movie or so forth. And then you had Steve Jobs coming out with the Apple Store and da-da-da. But the system changed completely, the ecosystem. So the same thing is the blockchain today. So we need to nurture it and protect it. And I disagree on, although I'm not a lawyer, I have quite a bit, I disagree on tight regulation, simply because there will be some country, there will be a jurisdiction that is going to do something else, they're going to take the opportunity away. But I fear that the regulators, they're going to punish the ecosystem, and eventually they will be punishing themselves towards that. So blockchain offers to artificial intelligence a significant opportunity to be a positive thing for this planet and not a controlling, I don't want to say negative, controlling thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I also think a lot of this is just hypothetical conversation. So as someone who grew up who spent my formative years pirating music, right? I just don't think this could be regulated. It didn't work for cryptography. It didn't work for music. You can't regulate bytes and information. So the conversation around governance or regulation of AI, I think it's a false one, mostly because you're just delaying the inevitable. It's math, right? At the end of the day, you can't prevent that from spreading. You can change the definition of governance, meaning how and when data is being generated, collected, and shared. But for the larger question of what do you do with AI and ML models, I don't think that can be regulated.
So are you saying that the government cannot regulate?
They'll try, but
They'll try,
yeah.
but it's not gonna work.
In the same way that the most powerful entity on the planet, the music industry, couldn't really stop pirated music, I have a hard time believing that the US government or the Canadian government or the EU is going to do a better job preventing the spread of certain things.
Well, I mean, I guess, so just to maybe add on top of that, so when I think of like AI decentralized, like in AI you have a few things, like you have input data, you have algorithms, you have learning process, and you have an output. So whenever I think about like a blockchain and AI, it's a question of a blockchain can be really a platform where you get to agree on some of those things, like where the data is coming from, what algorithms you should run, how the learning should be conducted, how you tune the parameters, and so on and so forth, and what is the output. And so for me, like the blockchain is sort of a platform where you can run this consensus distributed in a decentralized fashion and agree on some of these parameters to make sure that you're kind of making progress with your learning systems.
Yeah, and we have to go, I think it's always good to go back to what's the purpose of these technologies and where and how did they come into existence. The whole idea of blockchain and started with Bitcoin just after the financial crisis and the failure of the banks. I mean, failure of the banks that cannot fail, right? So some people came out there and say, hey, is there a better system to administer our money? Because guess what? Who's really paying the bill? That's the taxpayer, not the bank. So a lot of smart people started thinking about this. And where we are today with blockchain, about 10 years later, is we're trying to reinvent new systems that are decentralized. But what really means that we're reinventing economic systems, cultural systems, political systems based on top of blockchain. So we're trying to reduce equity, inequality, increase equity, pushing the power to the edge, and really working around the big organizations like the nation states, like the banks, and see if people can somehow self-regulate. So examples include, obviously, financial systems, digital currency that are not regulated by central bank, voting, so everybody can have a voice. So there are different interesting projects where you can, for example, vote by topics and not vote by a person, but vote for a fraction of a political program that you like. You can, there are projects like Civil that looks like journalism to avoid the phenomenon of fake news, so people kind of cross-fact check in a peer review kind of system. Ujo music is peer-to-peer. So the common thread, again, is to remove kind of a central entity that oftentimes captures a lot of value. So what if the creator can actually share their music and capture much more of the value they generate themselves? And where we're coming with AI is really like we're inputting a lot of data in these machines, like the Facebooks and everything. We really don't know what's going on, what's cooking in there. But we know one thing is that our data is being used for something, and we don't see the money back. So blockchain is really an attempt to create systems that don't have these systemic barriers that generate this inequality and allow some of the money and the value getting back to every one of us.